Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we ease into the story of a royal screw-up so profound it could only have happened to a man who considered himself the very personification of divine authority. Imagine, if you will, the clamour of the English coast as a foreign fleet approaches. The air is thick with a scent of salt water and anticipation, the low winter sun casting long pale shadows across a landscape holding its breath. You can almost hear the creak of the ship's timbers, the rustle of pennants, the distant muffled sound of 1,000 people collectively holding their breath. A new queen is arriving, and all of England has been told to expect a vision of beauty, a diplomatic triumph, a perfect complement to the mighty King Henry VIII. You, however, are a fly on the wall, a silent observer of a very specific historical moment, and you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1539, and the air is electric with a kind of nervous energy that only a royal arrival can generate. You find yourself standing, or rather shivering, on the dock at Rochester, feeling the damp chill seep through your thin wool tunic. The great English court has assembled, a peacock parade of silks and velvets, and you're just part of the background hum, a forgotten extra in this grand, slow-motion drama. The object of all this attention, the woman everyone has been talking about for months, is a German princess named Anne of Cleves. Her brother Duke William has forged an alliance with Henry, a pact of Protestant strength against the Catholic powers of Europe. It's a marriage of convenience, of course, a cold calculation of political necessity, but everyone is expected to pretend it's a fairy tale. For weeks the stories have flown thick and fast. Messengers have galloped across continents, bearing tidings of the new queen-to-be. Henry, who has by this point gone through 2 wives and is looking for a third, has been assured of her virtues, her grace, and most importantly, her beauty. A highly respected painter, Hans Holbein the Younger, was even dispatched to Cleves to capture her likeness. His portrait, a meticulous and detailed work, showed a woman with a pleasant round face, intelligent eyes, and an air of quiet dignity. It was a masterpiece of royal flattery, capturing not just what she looked like, but what the king wanted her to look like. It was a visual promise, a guarantee of future happiness and dynastic stability, and it was a lie. The ships finally drop anchor. The gangplank is lowered and out she steps. You squint, trying to get a better look. She's tall, taller than you expected. She's wearing a German gown, a style so foreign to the English court that it looks like something from another planet. The colours are rich, but the silhouette is stark, boxy and stiff. There are no low-cut necklines, no intricate French hoods, no soft English fabrics that cling to the form, just a rigid, high-necked garment that seems to swallow her whole, and then you see her face. The reality of it, unadorned and unvarnished by the painter's brush, hits you like a cold slap. She is, to put it kindly, not what anyone expected. Her skin is sallow, her face long, and her expression seems a little blank. To be fair, she has been travelling for weeks, in winter, on a ship. She's probably exhausted, terrified, and more than a little seasick. But still, the whispers start. They're soft at first, little puffs of breath in the cold air, but they are there. You hear a courtier next to you mutter something about her nose, another about her skin. Everyone is looking for the beautiful woman from the portrait, but all they find is this weary-looking girl in a strange dress. Now, a quirky little detail, something that historians still argue whether it was true or just more court gossip. It's said that Anne, raised in a conservative, sheltered court, had not been taught to read or write, or even to play a musical instrument beyond a simple clavichord. These were considered essential accomplishments for an English queen. She could sew, she could embroider, she could manage a household, all admirable things, but they were the skills of a good German hausfrau, not a worldly, cultured consort for one of the most powerful monarchs in Europe. This was not the kind of woman who could hold court, engage in witty banter with ambassadors, or dance with the king. But the real drama has yet to begin, because you see Henry has a plan. He wants to surprise his future wife. He has ridden ahead of his court a small group of trusted friends, and he's wearing a disguise. He's dressed in the simple clothes of a common man, perhaps a stable hand or a court servant, and he intends to sneak up on her, give her a kiss, and watch her reaction. It's a moment out of a cheap romance novel, a scene you would dismiss as utterly unbelievable in a film. Yet, here he is, the King of England, a man in his late 40s, his body already bloated from years of gluttony and a painful leg ulcer that has made him short-tempered and paranoid. He arrives at the lodgings where Anne is resting. He sees her, and he does not like what he sees. He pulls back. He does not reveal himself. The surprise has backfired, and not in a funny, light-hearted way. It has revealed a profound and ugly truth. The king is not pleased. He is in fact disgusted. He storms away, leaving his horrified entourage in his wake. The whole thing, the entire carefully orchestrated diplomatic ballet, has just skidded to a halt. Henry, who had gone to bed the previous night thinking he was about to marry a masterpiece, has just seen a painting he finds fundamentally flawed. The next day, when he is officially presented to her, there is no fanfare, no joy, no spark of anything. He greets her with a cold, perfunctory kiss and a stilted conversation. The public ceremony is a disaster. The king is distant, his jaw set, his eyes darting around as if looking for a way out. Anne, for her part, seems completely oblivious to the coldness. She's a foreigner, a stranger in a strange land, and she probably mistakes his reserve for royal dignity. Little does she know that behind the scenes her soon-to-be husband is in a state of barely contained panic. He's yelling at his trusted adviser Thomas Cromwell for foisting this woman upon him. "I like her not! I like her not!" he's reported to have shouted. This is the mainstream historical fact of the matter. Henry VIII's first meeting with Anne of Cleves was an unmitigated disaster that instantly sealed her fate. From the very beginning, their marriage was doomed. The king, a man who saw himself as a semi-divine figure and whose personal whims dictated the course of an entire nation, had been led to believe he was getting one thing and had received another. And in a world where Henry's desires were the only things that mattered, this was a problem of epic, terrifying proportions. The stage is now set not for a royal wedding, but for a political train wreck of the highest order. You stand on the periphery of the English court, a silent witness to a kind of controlled panic. The air, which just moments ago was filled with the clamour of a grand royal reception, now hangs heavy with unspoken tension. The courtiers, so eager to impress with their finery, have begun to look nervous, their smiles frozen on their faces. They can feel it, that subtle but unmistakable shift in the air that signals the king's displeasure. And when the king is unhappy, things tend to get complicated. To understand the full gravity of this moment, you must cast your mind back, a kind of mental rewind to the tumultuous years that preceded this day. This wasn't Henry's first time at the marital rodeo, not by a long shot. He had already been married and unmarried more times than most people have dinner parties. His first wife, the devout and long-suffering Catherine of Aragon, was cast aside after more than 2 decades of marriage for her failure to produce a male heir. That divorce, you'll recall, plunged England into a full-blown religious schism, severing the country from the Catholic Church. A mainstream historical fact of the era, one that feels utterly bonkers when you really think about it, is that a king's desire for a male heir was considered a matter of such national and theological importance that it could literally change the course of a nation's religion. But it was what came next that truly haunts the court. Henry's second wife, Anne Boleyn, was the woman for whom he broke with Rome. She was witty, fashionable, and ferociously intelligent. For a time she was his everything, and yet when she too failed to produce a male heir, giving him only a daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I, his affections soured. The end was swift and brutal. She was accused of adultery, incest, and treason, charges so ludicrously trumped up that they are a testament to the court's willingness to bend to the king's will. Within weeks, she was executed on Tower Green. You can still feel the echo of that moment, a kind of phantom chill that hangs over the great halls of Hampton Court and Greenwich. Anne Boleyn's death was a stark and terrifying warning to everyone in Henry's orbit. A queen's life, a queen's very existence, was as fragile as a pane of glass. Then there was Jane Seymour, the meek and gentle lady-in-waiting, who finally gave him what he wanted. A son, the future King Edward VI. But she died shortly after childbirth, and Henry was genuinely bereft. He treated her as a true love, and she became the gold standard by which all future queens would be measured. In the king's mind, she was the perfect consort, and now, as he surveys the awkward, stiff figure of Anne of Cleves, he is looking not at a new wife, but at a profound and disappointing failure. She is not Jane Seymour, she is not even close. So, when Henry storms away from his first encounter with Anne of Cleves, his mind isn't just focused on her appearance. He's thinking about his own history, a dangerous game of chance he's played and won and lost. He's thinking about the political fallout of his last divorce, and the terrible price Anne Boleyn paid for his fleeting fancy. He's thinking about his country, still teetering on the edge of religious and political turmoil. He's thinking about the power of his image, the reputation of a king who gets what he wants. And in this moment, he wants out. The pressure on the people around him is immense. Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister, is the man most responsible for this match. He is the one who negotiated the treaty, the one who saw the strategic advantage of an alliance with the Protestant Duchy of Cleves. He is the one who received Hans Holbein's flattering portrait and presented it to the king as proof of Anne's suitability. And now he is the one who must find a solution. You watch him, a portly, middle-aged man with a worried frown etched onto his face, as he scurries through the halls, his every step a silent prayer. A quirky detail to chew on. The court of Cleves was famously conservative. Unlike the French and English courts, where queens and princesses were taught to sing, dance, and speak multiple languages, the women of Cleves were raised to be modest, demure, and devout. They were taught the domestic arts, and their lives revolved around prayer and household management. Anne of Cleves, in her own world, was probably the perfect princess, a paragon of virtue. But in the glittering, cutthroat world of the Tudor court, she was a cultural anachronism, a square peg in a very round hole. She was a woman who didn't even know how to play cards, a crucial pastime for English courtiers looking to curry favour with the king. Historians still argue whether her lack of sophistication was a deliberate choice by her brother to protect her, or simply a reflection of the more provincial German court. The whispers you heard earlier now grow louder. The courtiers, sensing the shift in the king's mood, begin to turn on Anne. The very same people who gushed about her beauty a few days ago now find fault with her every movement, her every gesture. Her clothes are too strange, her manners too stiff, her German accent too pronounced. The king's dislike has become a kind of social permission, a license for everyone else to join in the chorus of condemnation. You find yourself feeling a strange mix of pity and fascination. You know this game. You've seen it played before. The victim is always a woman, and the stakes are always her life. Henry, for his part, is not just disappointed, he is incensed. He feels betrayed. His carefully manicured image as the perfect, omnipotent monarch has been tarnished. He has been given something he does not want, something he finds physically repulsive. And in his world, this is an insult of the highest order. He is now consumed with one single thought: how to get out of this marriage before it has even properly begun. The wedding is scheduled for just a few days away, on January 6th, and the entire kingdom is prepared for a celebration. But Henry, ever the master of his own reality, is already plotting its demise. You watch as his courtiers, his yes-men, scurry to do his bidding. They are no longer thinking about a happy union or a political alliance. They are thinking about their own necks. They have seen what happens when the king is angry. They have seen Cromwell's sudden fall from grace and rise again. They have seen Anne Boleyn's body lying on the scaffold. And they know, with a chilling certainty, that the game is now in play. A single misstep, a word spoken out of turn, could be the end of them. Anne of Cleves might be the one in danger, but every single person in the room is holding their breath. The air is thick with a different kind of tension now, the kind that comes before the storm. The stage is set for a quiet, desperate battle of wits, a frantic search for an escape hatch, and the unfortunate woman at the centre of it all doesn't even know she's in a fight for her life. You're now a silent observer, a ghostly presence in the royal chambers, where the whispered panic of the court has reached a crescendo. The air is thick with a different kind of tension now, the kind that comes before the storm. Henry VIII, a man not known for his subtlety, has made his displeasure brutally clear. And as you watch, the fingers of blame begin to point, first tentatively, then with furious certainty toward the man who made all this possible, Thomas Cromwell, and by extension, the portrait that had so thoroughly duped the king. You rewind the clock in your mind, travelling back a few months, back to the comfortable quiet of a German ducal court. Here, in the castle of William, Duke of Cleves, a man is at work. He is Hans Holbein the Younger, one of the greatest portraitists of the age, and his canvas sits before him, ready to capture a royal likeness. The entire diplomatic enterprise hinges on this man's skill. Henry, for his part, has grown tired of relying on mere descriptions from ambassadors, which, as he's learned the hard way, can be wildly inaccurate. He demands a portrait, a visual guarantee of his future queen's beauty. So, Holbein travels to Cleves. He is a master of his craft, known for his ability to capture not just a person's face, but the very essence of their character. His work is so lifelike, so detailed, that a mainstream historical fact of the time is that some of his portraits were considered more reliable documents than written descriptions. You can imagine the scene: the quiet studio, the soft light from the window, the Princess Anne sitting patiently as the artist works, his eyes moving back and forth between her and the canvas. Now, here's a quirky tidbit you might not know. The clothes Anne is wearing in the portrait are not her own. They are the latest fashion from the English court, specifically sent by Henry's agent to ensure the princess was dressed in a way that would be pleasing to the king. The high-collared German gowns she was so accustomed to were considered stiff and unappealing in England, so Holbein dresses her in a magnificent scarlet dress, embroidered with pearls, a stunning piece of English couture that makes her look more vibrant, more sophisticated than she actually was. This subtle manipulation, this sleight of hand, was not done out of malice, but out of a misguided desire to present her in the best possible light. It's a bit like taking a really flattering selfie. You're not lying exactly, you're just editing a little. The finished portrait is a marvel. It shows Anne of Cleves as a woman of quiet dignity and grace. The pale skin, the gentle features, the subtle hint of a smile on her lips. It's all there, captured with Holbein's unparalleled skill. He doesn't invent a face, he simply perfects the one that is there. He softens the lines, brightens the eyes, and gives her a kind of serene, almost saintly aura. When the painting is finally sent to Henry, the king is delighted. He is presented not with the actual woman, but with an idealized version of her, a painted lie that tells him exactly what he wants to hear. He looks at this portrait and sees beauty, piety, and a worthy queen. He is so taken with it that he pronounces, with his usual bombast, that he would be content. And this is where the historical debate begins. Historians still argue whether Holbein intentionally exaggerated Anne's good features to flatter her or her brother, or if he was simply a victim of the king's notoriously high and volatile standards. Was he a cynical accomplice in a royal deception, or just an artist doing his job in a world where patrons expected perfection? The truth, as is often the case, is probably somewhere in the middle. Holbein was an employee of the crown. He knew what the king wanted, and he was a master at giving it to him. He likely painted a version of Anne that was both a faithful likeness and a pleasing ideal. The problem wasn't the painting per se, the problem was the king's expectation. Henry, ever the romantic at heart, or perhaps just the perpetually disillusioned one, had fallen in love with a painting, not a person. Now, fast forward back to the present moment, back to the panicked English court. The portrait, once a source of so much joy, has become a source of so much fury. Henry is waving it in the faces of his courtiers, his great bulk trembling with rage. "I am not content," he bellows. "This is a fraud. I have been deceived." He feels a personal affront. He, the King of England, has been sold a bill of goods. The blame, you can see, is not just about Anne's appearance, it's about his own pride. He feels like he's been made to look a fool. The courtiers, ever ready to turn on a dime, now look at the painting with new eyes. They find fault where before they found beauty. They whisper about Holbein's supposed deception, his lack of integrity. They forget that they too were taken in by the image. The blame is a hot potato, and everyone is trying to pass it off before it scalds their hands. Thomas Cromwell, of course, is holding it the longest. He is the one who commissioned the painting, he is the one who vouched for the artist, and he is the one who now has to face the full force of the king's fury. The situation is now more than just a matter of personal dislike. It has become a political and a public relations nightmare. Henry's reputation, his very credibility, is on the line. He is publicly committed to a marriage, a grand alliance with a powerful German duchy, and now he wants to back out. He can't simply say, "I think she's ugly." That would be petty, and in his own mind, beneath a king. He needs a reason, a legal pretext, a loophole. And so, the great search begins. Cromwell and his men are now frantic, poring over legal documents, looking for any shred of evidence, any flimsy excuse to dissolve this disastrous union. They are no longer thinking about how to make the marriage work. They are thinking about how to break it. And as you watch them scurry about, a mix of high-stakes politicians and frightened servants, you realise that the real drama isn't the grand public spectacle of a royal wedding. It's the quiet, desperate machinations behind the scenes, all because of a single portrait that told a beautiful, terrible lie. You're now a ghost in two places at once, your presence flickering between the rigid, conservative court of Cleves and the boisterous, cutthroat world of the Tudors. This contrast is the key to understanding the full scope of the disaster that is currently unfolding. It's not just a matter of a king's personal vanity, though that is certainly a huge part of it. It's a clash of cultures, a collision of two worlds that were so fundamentally different they were practically from different planets. Let's start with the German side of the equation. The Duchy of Cleves, under the rule of Anne's brother Duke William, was a very different place from England. It was a conservative, pious, and almost fanatically private court, a quirky and telling tidbit about this culture. It was so insulated that the women of the court, including the princesses, were rarely, if ever, seen outside of their immediate family circles. They were raised in a world of domesticity and devoutness. Their education was centred on needlework, music for pleasure, and household management. They were not taught the social graces of witty banter, courtly flirtation, or the subtle arts of political manoeuvring. A mainstream historical fact of the era is that the Cleves court was deeply suspicious of foreign influences, especially the flamboyant, often scandalous French customs that had become so popular in England. They were Protestant, but a more Luther-inspired, quietly devout form of Protestantism, which valued piety and simplicity over the flashy displays of wealth and power that were common elsewhere. Imagine, for a moment, Anne's upbringing. She grew up in a world where her virtue and modesty were her most important assets. She would have worn high-necked, rigid gowns that covered her from head to toe, her face framed by a stiff linen cap. She would have been taught to be silent and demure in the presence of men. She was, by all accounts, a well-behaved and dutiful daughter. In her world, she was the epitome of royal womanhood. Now you have to picture the other side of the coin, the English court of Henry VIII. This was a place of dazzling splendour, of constant entertainment, and of ruthless social climbing. The halls of Hampton Court and Greenwich were a perpetual theatre, with every courtier playing a role. The women of the court were expected to be beautiful, stylish, and accomplished. They spoke French and Italian, they played the lute and the harpsichord, and they danced with a practised, elegant grace. Their gowns were low-cut, their headdresses, the famous French hoods, were designed to show off their features. A woman who wanted to catch the king's eye had to be witty, charming, and a master of the double entendre. Think Anne Boleyn, a woman who could hold her own in a debate with the most learned men of the day. Think Jane Seymour, a woman whose demure nature was a carefully cultivated facade that perfectly suited the king's need for a quiet wife, after the drama of Anne Boleyn. This is where the grand and ultimately tragic misunderstanding began. Henry, a man who spoke multiple languages and considered himself a master of diplomacy, was, in reality, incredibly provincial. He expected the world to conform to his standards. He had sent an artist to paint a portrait of Anne, but he had failed to understand that the very culture she came from was fundamentally incompatible with his own. He was getting a German Hausfrau, not a French-style courtier. He was getting a woman raised to be a devout wife, not a political partner, and he couldn't stand it. Historians still argue whether Anne of Cleves was a victim of her own culture or a victim of Henry's expectations. Was she truly as unaccomplished as the English courtiers claimed, or were her skills simply undervalued and misunderstood? It's likely a mix of both. She was not a great beauty, that much seems to be agreed upon. But her lack of fluency in French, a language spoken by all educated English courtiers, and her ignorance of card games and other courtly pastimes were not personal failings. They were simply the product of her environment. You watch as Anne, in her stiff German clothes, tries to navigate this bewildering new world. She's surrounded by people who are looking at her as if she's a curiosity, an oddity. She's trying to be polite, trying to be a good guest, but she has no cultural compass to guide her. She offers a silent, gentle smile and receives, in return, cold stares. Her retinue of German servants is equally lost. Their language and customs a barrier that separates them from the rest of the court. The English courtiers, ever so polite on the surface, are merciless in their mockery behind her back. This cultural chasm is something that Thomas Cromwell, in his frantic desire to secure a political alliance, completely overlooked. He saw Cleves as a valuable Protestant ally, a strategic counterweight to the Catholic powers of Europe. He saw a diplomatic opportunity and he pounced on it. He did not, however, consider the human element. He did not consider what would happen when a quiet, dutiful German princess was dropped into the middle of a flamboyant, treacherous Tudor court. He did not consider what would happen when a king who saw himself as a lover of women, as a man of refined taste, was presented with a woman who was, in his mind, culturally and aesthetically inferior. And so, the stage is set not just for a royal rejection, but for a great and terrible lesson in the pitfalls of international relations. A king's personal taste, his whims and his vanities, have proven to be more important than the strategic needs of his kingdom. The marriage, once a cornerstone of a grand diplomatic strategy, has become a liability. The alliance, once so promising, now teeters on the brink of collapse. You watch as the queen, who was never truly a queen, is caught in the middle, a bewildered foreigner in a world she was never prepared for. Her only crime, in the eyes of the king, was being herself. And in the world of the Tudors, that was a capital offence. You're now a fly on the wall, a ghostly witness to one of the most infamously awkward first encounters in all of history. The scene is Rochester Castle, on the eve of New Year's Day, 1540. The winter air bites at your cheeks, but inside the atmosphere is electric with anticipation. Everyone knows the king is here. He has ridden ahead of his royal procession, a small, trusted entourage in tow, to surprise his bride-to-be. You can feel the nervous energy radiating from the courtiers as they scurry about, trying to look busy and important. The king, for his part, is a study in miscalculated bravado. He is dressed in what he considers a disguise, a simple, nondescript riding coat. A mainstream historical fact you might find surprising is that Henry VIII, despite his enormous ego, loved to perform these little theatrical experiments. He enjoyed the thought of catching people off guard, of observing them in their natural state, unburdened by the weight of his royal presence. This time, however, the act is about to backfire spectacularly. He bursts into the chamber where Anne of Cleves is resting. She's playing a quiet card game with her ladies-in-waiting, a German game that no one in the English court recognises. The room is warm, lit by the soft glow of candles. You can see her face clearly. She's not a beauty, not in the way the English court understands it. Her face is long, her nose perhaps a little too prominent, and her skin, which the painter Holbein had made to look so milky and smooth, is a little sallow after her long journey. Henry approaches her. He's smiling, full of the anticipation of his own cleverness. He leans forward, ready to plant a kiss on her cheek, and then he stops. The smile vanishes. His eyes, which were sparkling with mischief just a moment ago, now narrow with a kind of dawning horror. It's as if a great, terrible shockwave has just hit him, knocking all the air out of his lungs. He has seen the portrait. He knows what he was promised, and now he is looking at the reality. He recoils. It's a physical, involuntary movement, a kind of visceral repulsion that he doesn't even bother to hide. He turns on his heel and stomps out of the room, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. Anne, meanwhile, seems completely oblivious. She looks up, a gentle, bewildered expression on her face, and asks one of her ladies who that strange man was. This is a crucial, quirky tidbit. She had no idea that her disguised suitor was the King of England. She had been raised in a world where royal protocol was strict and unyielding. The idea that a king, any king, would behave in such a bizarre, informal manner was utterly alien to her. She thought he was just a rude servant, and she was rightly confused by his abrupt exit. The king, meanwhile, is now in a state of barely contained fury. You can hear his bellowing from down the hall as he rips off his disguise and throws it to the ground. He rounds on his companions, his face a mottled shade of red, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He is not just disappointed. He is incensed. He feels betrayed. His carefully manicured image as the omnipotent monarch has been tarnished. He has been sold a bill of goods, and he has been made to look a fool. He feels an utter and complete physical repulsion toward the woman he is now bound to marry. You hear him huffing and puffing, his words a stream of broken, angry sentences. "She is no beauty," he rages. "I like her not. She is not as she was represented." He is not just talking about her face. He's talking about the entire situation. He is a man who is used to getting what he wants, when he wants it. And in this one moment, on this one evening, he has been given something he emphatically does not want. This is where the psychological drama truly begins. Henry, a man whose physical ailments had made him irascible and unpredictable, now fixates on this one thing, his personal humiliation. He is a man in his late 40s, his body racked with pain from a jousting accident, his leg ulcer perpetually oozing. His famously athletic frame has long since bloated with gluttony. He is not the handsome, powerful prince who wooed Anne Boleyn. He's an aging tyrant, and the thought of being tied to a woman he finds physically repulsive is a torment he cannot bear. He immediately sends for Thomas Cromwell, the man who arranged the marriage. Cromwell arrives, a look of abject terror on his face. Henry does not mince words. He demands to know what on earth has happened. He holds up Holbein's portrait and compares it to Anne's living face, a cruel and public indictment of the artist and the minister. Cromwell, a man who has always been able to talk his way out of a tight spot, is now completely at a loss. He can't argue with the king's disgust. All he can do is stammer out apologies and promises to fix things. Historians still argue whether Henry's reaction was a genuine visceral repulsion or a calculated political manoeuvre to escape a marriage that had already lost its strategic value. After all, the political landscape had shifted. The alliance with the Protestant powers was no longer as urgent as it had once been. Was Henry simply looking for an excuse to get out of an inconvenient marriage? Or was he truly, deeply, and utterly repulsed by the woman he had been tricked into marrying? The truth, as is often the case, is probably a combination of the two. Henry was a man whose personal feelings and political calculations were often indistinguishable. His own repulsion gave him a perfect excuse to abandon a diplomatic strategy that no longer served his interests. So, the stage is set. The wedding is still scheduled for January 6th, just a few days away. But the atmosphere is now thick with a different kind of tension. The whispers are no longer about Anne's appearance. They're about the king's fury, about Cromwell's fate, about the fate of the entire kingdom. You watch as the courtiers, sensing the shift in the royal mood, begin to distance themselves from the woman who was supposed to be their queen. The air is filled with a sense of impending doom, and Anne, the poor, bewildered, and completely oblivious princess, is caught in the middle of a storm she doesn't even know is coming. The air in the king's private chambers is thick with a kind of desperate, frantic energy. Henry, a man whose moods could shift with the wind, has settled into a state of cold, calculated fury. He's no longer just angry. He's now consumed with one single thought: how to get out of this mess. The wedding is looming just a few days away, and the entire kingdom is prepared for a grand, celebratory affair. But the king, ever the master of his own reality, has decided it will not happen. Or at least, it will happen, but it will not last. You watch as he paces the room, his heavy gait a grim rhythm against the rich carpets. He summons his most trusted advisers, including the now trembling Thomas Cromwell and Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. The meeting is not a discussion. It is a command. Henry wants a way out, and he wants it now. He wants a legal pretext, a theological loophole, any flimsy excuse that will allow him to annul this marriage before it has even properly begun. He cannot simply say, "I find her ugly." That would be a public humiliation of his own making, and in his world that is a fate worse than death. So, the hunt begins. His advisers, a group of frightened men whose lives hang by a thread, are now scrambling to find a solution. They're poring over legal documents, looking for any shred of evidence, any flimsy excuse. They look at the marriage contract itself, searching for a clause that has been violated. They look at Anne's past, at her family history, at her previous engagements. A mainstream historical fact that they immediately focus on is the rumour of a pre-contract. Before coming to England, Anne had been betrothed to a son of the Duke of Lorraine. The marriage was never consummated, and the contract was legally dissolved. But in the convoluted world of royal law, a pre-contract could be a valid reason to void a future marriage. They pounce on this with the eagerness of a pack of wolves. Cromwell, in a desperate attempt to salvage his own position, is at the forefront of this effort. He is sweating, his face pale with fear. He is a man who rose from obscurity to become the most powerful man in England, and he knows that a single wrong move could bring him crashing down. He is the one who championed this marriage, the one who promised the king a diplomatic triumph. He is the one who must now undo it. His task is unenviable. He must convince the king that he can get him out of the marriage, while at the same time not admitting that he himself was at fault for the problem in the first place. You notice a particularly quirky detail in the plan. Henry's advisors decide to use Henry's own words against him, albeit in a carefully curated way. They will not present the annulment as a result of Henry's personal dislike of Anne. Instead, they will frame it as a matter of conscience. Henry, they will argue, was so disturbed by the rumours of her previous betrothal that he could not, in good faith, consummate the marriage. It's a brilliant, cynical piece of political theatre. It turns Henry's personal repulsion into a matter of pious rectitude. It makes the king the victim, the man who was so honourable and devout that he couldn't bring himself to marry a woman with a questionable past. And this is where the open scholarly debate comes into play. Historians still argue whether the pre-contract with the Duke of Lorraine was a genuine, legitimate reason for an annulment, or if it was simply a convenient excuse cooked up by a desperate court. Was Henry truly bothered by this long-ago betrothal, or was it just a way to save face? The truth, as is often the case, is that it was probably a bit of both. The pre-contract was real, but it was also a loophole that was only convenient because the king had a personal reason for wanting to use it. The plan is cunning, but it is also incredibly risky. The marriage is not yet consummated, which makes an annulment legally easier, but the political fallout could be catastrophic. The Duke of Cleves is a powerful ruler, and he is a staunch Protestant ally. Annul this marriage, and England could be left isolated, surrounded by Catholic enemies. But Henry, in his rage, does not care about any of this. He's a man who has changed the religion of his country for a woman he loved. He will not hesitate to risk a diplomatic war for a woman he finds repulsive. So the wheels are set in motion. The wedding will still take place, a concession to appearances and a nod to the fact that you can't just cancel a royal wedding on a whim. But it will be a farce, a hollow spectacle of a grand occasion that everyone knows is a sham. The public will be none the wiser, at least not yet. But behind the scenes, the frantic, desperate machinations continue. The courtiers, smelling blood in the water, begin to circle around Cromwell, ready to pounce on his failure. The king's favourite, a young woman named Catherine Howard, is beginning to catch his eye. The stage is set for a quiet, desperate battle of wits. The woman at the centre of it all, Anne of Cleves, is still completely oblivious. She's a pawn in a game she doesn't understand, and she has no idea that the moment she says "I do," the battle to undo it will have already begun. The day of the wedding arrives, and you find yourself swept along in the grand, absurd spectacle. It is January 6th, 1540. The halls of the royal palace at Greenwich are draped in gold and velvet, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat and mulled wine. The music is playing, the courtiers are smiling, and from the outside it looks like a perfect day. But if you're close enough, if you are a fly on the wall, you can see the truth in the tight lines around the king's mouth, in the averted eyes of his courtiers, in the strange, distant stillness of the bride. Anne of Cleves walks down the aisle, a regal and dignified figure in her magnificent wedding gown. She looks calm, almost serene. She has no idea that the man at the end of the aisle, the one she's walking toward, is already plotting her demise. Henry VIII, for his part, looks grim. A mainstream historical fact is that throughout the ceremony he looked less like a happy groom and more like a man walking to his own execution. He's a man who is famous for his love of pomp and pageantry. But on this day, he seems to be in a rush, as if he wants to get the whole thing over with as quickly as possible. The ceremony is brief and to the point. The vows are exchanged, the rings are presented, and the priest pronounces them man and wife. As Henry leans in to kiss his new bride, you can almost feel his palpable disgust. It is a quick, perfunctory peck on the cheek, a far cry from the passionate displays he was known for in his youth. The whole thing feels hollow, a grand lie being told for the benefit of an entire nation. The cheering, which is a bit forced and a little too loud, cannot fill the silence that now hangs between the royal couple. And then comes the awkward part, the wedding night. According to royal protocol, the king and queen must retire to their chambers, and their bedding must be blessed by a bishop who will then leave them to their duties. The entire court, of course, is watching. The pressure for the king to do his kingly duty, to produce an heir and secure the alliance, is immense. But as you watch Henry and Anne disappear into their private chambers, You know, with a chilling certainty, that nothing is going to happen. The next morning, the report from the king is grim. A quirky detail that is often glossed over in historical accounts is the sheer public nature of royal marriage consummation. The bishop was expected to ask the king, point blank, whether the marriage had been consummated. Henry, for his part, was brutally honest. He told his attendants, "I had left her as good a maid as I found her." He claimed he had tried, but that he had been unable to perform his husbandly duties. He attributed it to her unappealing appearance, claiming that the marriage was a great disappointment and that he had been unable to overcome his revulsion. He goes on in a rambling, humiliating confession to his attendants. "I felt no carnal knowledge of her. I have not felt myself disposed to it," he tells them. The whole thing feels less like a royal confession and more like a whining complaint from a petulant child. He is blaming her, of course. It is not his fault. It is hers. Her appearance has made him unable. This is the official version of events, the version that will be circulated throughout the court and eventually throughout Europe. The king is not to blame. The queen is. The open scholarly debate surrounding this event is intense. Historians still argue whether Henry's impotence was real or whether it was a convenient lie. He was a man in his late 40s, suffering from a painful leg ulcer that was probably a form of osteomyelitis, an infection of the bone. He had been a vigorous man in his youth, but his health was now in a steep decline. Was his inability to perform a genuine physical failing, brought on by age and ill health? Or was it an act, a cunning piece of political theatre designed to give him a pretext for an annulment? The truth, as is often the case, is probably a mix of both. Henry was a man whose body and mind were so closely intertwined that it's impossible to separate his physical failings from his psychological state. His dislike of Anne likely made him genuinely unable to perform, and his convenient inability gave him the perfect excuse to do what he wanted all along, to get out of the marriage. Anne, meanwhile, remains a picture of bewildered innocence. She is, by all accounts, completely unaware of the drama unfolding around her. She has been raised in a culture where royal marriages were often unromantic affairs, where love was a secondary consideration. She likely believes that her husband's coldness is simply a matter of royal dignity, and she sees his lack of interest in her as something that is normal and to be expected. She has no idea that she is the subject of a political firestorm, that her husband is telling everyone who will listen that she's not a maid, but a mare of a woman, and that his marriage to her is a great disappointment. The unconsummated marriage is the final piece of the puzzle, the one legal detail that will make the annulment possible. The court, once so eager to please the king, now begins to treat Anne with a kind of chilling formality. The smiles have vanished, the conversations are stilted, and the laughter has died down to a nervous hum. The grand lie has now become a grand reality. The queen who was never truly a queen is now a political prisoner, a pawn in a game she doesn't understand, and she has no idea that her quiet, bewildered innocence will be her greatest weapon. You stand in the ornate, suffocating halls of the Tudor court, watching the grand political machine of Henry VIII grind into motion. The wedding is over, the marriage unconsummated, and the king is in a state of barely contained fury. The courtiers are scurrying about, a pack of frantic ants, all trying to anticipate their sovereign's next move. Yet, in the very centre of this swirling maelstrom of fear and ambition, stands the one person who seems utterly and completely untouched by it all, Anne of Cleves. She's a picture of bewildered innocence, a quiet observer of a drama she doesn't know she's a part of. She is, by all accounts, a kind and gentle soul. She smiles at people, she tries to make conversation in her halting, German-inflected English, and she goes about her daily business with a quiet dignity. She has no idea that she is the subject of a political firestorm. She has no idea that the man she calls her husband is telling everyone who will listen that he finds her repulsive. She is simply a princess in a strange land trying to do her best. This is a crucial and often overlooked part of the story. Her lack of sophistication, her very innocence, is her greatest shield. She doesn't understand the complex web of political intrigue that surrounds her. She doesn't know how to read the subtle signals of the court. She doesn't recognise the cold smiles, the averted eyes, the whispered conversations that are taking place behind her back. She's simply too naive to know that she is in mortal danger. A mainstream historical fact of her upbringing in Cleves is that her world was small, pious, and governed by strict and unyielding rules. A princess did not question her fate. She was a political asset, a pawn to be moved around a chessboard for the benefit of her family. Her value was in her royal blood, not in her personal charm or her political acumen. She had no reason to expect her husband to be a lover, a confidant, or a friend. She expected him to be a king, a man of power and authority, and his coldness, she probably reasoned, was just part of his royal dignity. Think about it from her perspective. She has just arrived in a new country. She doesn't speak the language fluently. Her culture is completely alien to her new surroundings. The people around her are constantly whispering and laughing in a way she doesn't understand. Her husband, a man she's been told is one of the most powerful rulers in the world, is distant and cold. What is she to think? She has no frame of reference for this kind of bizarre behaviour. She has no way of knowing that her very existence is a threat to the man who brought her here. Now, here's a quirky tidbit that reveals just how oblivious she was. One of Henry's attendants, a man named Sir Anthony Browne, later testified that he once asked her if she had slept with the king. She replied with a kind of innocent bemusement, saying that she lay in bed with him at night and that he would come to her in the morning and give her a kiss on the cheek. She thought this was normal, that it was the extent of a royal couple's intimacy. She had no idea what she was supposed to be doing, or what her husband was supposed to be doing. She was, in the words of a courtier, a maid for all that came of it. This lack of knowledge, this utter innocence, is a powerful weapon in a court built on cunning and deceit. Historians still argue whether Anne's naivety was genuine or a cleverly cultivated act. Was she truly this innocent, or was she a master of a different kind of game, one of passive resistance and feigned ignorance? The evidence, however, seems to point to genuine naivety. A woman who was truly playing a game would have tried to ingratiate herself with the king. She would have tried to learn English, to dance, to play cards. She would have tried to win his affections, and did none of these things, at least not in a way that seemed to have any effect. She simply remained herself, a quiet, dignified, and utterly bewildered princess. Meanwhile, the court is in a state of high-stakes panic. Thomas Cromwell, the man who arranged the marriage, is now in a desperate fight for his life. Henry is furious, not just with Anne, but with the man who brought her to him. The king's advisors are now meeting in secret, trying to come up with a plan to get him out of this marriage. They are no longer thinking about Anne's feelings. They are no longer thinking about the political fallout. They are thinking about their own necks. And in the very centre of it all, the woman at the heart of the storm is blissfully unaware of the danger. Her bewildering innocence is her greatest asset, her most powerful weapon against the man who would destroy her. She's a woman who, through a stroke of historical luck and a complete lack of understanding, is about to survive a marriage to Henry VIII. The air in the king's court is now thick with the scent of fear and desperation. The official business of state has taken a back seat to one single, overriding obsession: finding a way out of the marriage with Anne of Cleves. You're a silent witness to the frantic machinations of the men whose lives hang in the balance, a spectral presence in the hushed candlelit rooms where the fate of a queen and a powerful minister is being decided. The king, for his part, has become a single-minded force of nature. He wants a divorce, and he doesn't care how he gets it. He is no longer concerned with international diplomacy, with the strategic alliance with Cleves, or with the fate of his own soul. He is a man consumed by personal dislike and a deep-seated feeling of betrayal. He sees Anne not as a person, but as a problem, a living, breathing obstacle to his happiness and his reputation. The man most in danger, of course, is Thomas Cromwell. He is the one who championed the marriage, the one who sent Holbein to paint the portrait, the one who convinced the king that Anne was a suitable match. And now, he is the one who must find a way to undo what he has done. He is a man who rose from the ranks of obscurity to become the most powerful minister in England. He is a master of political manoeuvring, a cunning and ruthless operator. But this time, he is not fighting an enemy. He is fighting the king himself, and he is losing. Cromwell and his men are now on a frantic hunt for a legal pretext. They are poring over the fine print of the marriage contract, looking for any clause that has been violated. They are interrogating members of Anne's retinue, asking them about her past, her family, her previous engagements. A mainstream historical fact that they latch onto is the rumour of a pre-contract, a previous betrothal between Anne and Francis, the son of the Duke of Lorraine. The marriage, they argue, was not properly dissolved. This pre-contract, according to the convoluted rules of canon law, could be a valid reason to annul the marriage. But even this is not enough for the king. He is demanding more. He wants to be seen as the victim, as a man who was deceived and misled. So, the hunt for a loophole widens. A particularly quirky and telling tidbit is the way they try to use Anne's own family against her. Henry's lawyers argue that the marriage was invalid because Anne's mother had not given her explicit consent to the match. This is, of course, a ridiculous argument. The whole world knows that her mother, Maria of Jülich, had given her full blessing to the match. But in the world of the Tudor court, legal arguments were not about truth or justice. They were about serving the king's will. Cromwell, in a desperate attempt to save his own skin, is willing to do whatever it takes. He is a man who knows how to bend the law, to manipulate the rules, to get the desired result. He is the one who helped Henry break with Rome. He is the one who helped him annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. He is the one who orchestrated the fall of Anne Boleyn. He is, in essence, a master of divorce. But this time, the client is not happy, and the consequences for failure are dire. You can almost feel the psychological pressure building in the room. The air is thick with the weight of expectation, the terrible knowledge that one wrong move could mean the end of a career, the end of a life. Cromwell is now walking a tightrope, trying to convince the king that he can get the annulment, while at the same time not admitting that he, himself, was at fault for the problem in the first place. He is a man trapped between a rock and a hard place, and he is running out of time. This is where the open scholarly debate begins. Historians still argue whether Cromwell truly believed in the validity of the pre-contract argument, or if he was simply grasping at straws. Was he a loyal servant trying to do the king's bidding, or was he a cynical manipulator trying to save his own neck? The truth, as is often the case, is probably a combination of the two. Cromwell was a brilliant operator, a pragmatist who understood that in the world of the Tudors, you did whatever the king wanted, no matter the cost. He was trying to give the king what he wanted, a way out, and he was hoping that in doing so he would save himself. But the king, in his rage, is no longer thinking clearly. He is no longer thinking about logic or law. He's thinking about personal revenge. He is angry with Cromwell for the humiliating position he is in, and he is looking for a scapegoat. The search for a loophole has now become a hunt for a victim. And Thomas Cromwell, the man who brought the king the problem, is now in the running to be the one who pays the price. The grand political alliance with Cleves, once the cornerstone of a new foreign policy, is now an afterthought. The marriage, a symbol of hope and Protestant solidarity, is now a symbol of personal failure and public humiliation. And the woman at the centre of it all, Anne of Cleves, is still completely oblivious. She's a pawn in a game she doesn't understand, and she has no idea that the man who brought her here is now desperately trying to send her away at any cost. The royal court, once a dazzling stage for the performance of power, has now become a pressure cooker. The air is so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. You are a silent observer, a witness to the final desperate act of a man whose rise was as swift and dizzying as his fall, is about to be brutal and final. The man is Thomas Cromwell, and he is now fully enmeshed in a costly gamble, a high-stakes game of chance where the prize is his life, and the game pieces are the fate of a queen and the whim of a king. Cromwell's position is now more precarious than ever. A mainstream historical fact is that his rivals, led by the Duke of Norfolk and his ambitious niece, Catherine Howard, have sensed his weakness and are closing in for the kill. They are whispering in the king's ear, not just about Anne of Cleves, but about Cromwell's own supposed shortcomings. They are accusing him of everything from heresy to embezzlement. They are painting him as a man who is not a loyal servant of the crown, but a traitor who has led the king astray. But Cromwell, a man who built his career on political survival, is not going down without a fight. He is a master of the double bluff, a man who knows how to use his enemies' tactics against them. He is still working on the annulment, still trying to find a legal way out of the marriage. But at the same time, he is making a dangerous and ultimately fatal miscalculation. He is betting on the king's need for him, on the king's long-standing reliance on his strategic mind. He is gambling that Henry, despite his current fury, will not throw away the man who has managed all of his most difficult affairs for the last decade. The gamble is this: Cromwell believes that if he can deliver the annulment, if he can provide the king with a clean legal way out of the marriage, then all will be forgiven. He believes that his usefulness to the king outweighs the current temporary rage. He believes that once the problem of Anne of Cleves is solved, he will be back in the king's good graces. It is a logical calculation for a man who has always operated on logic, but he is forgetting that Henry VIII is not a man of logic. He is a man of emotion, a man of whim, and a man who is now deeply and irrevocably in love with Catherine Howard. You can see the subtle shift in the court. The king is no longer just angry about Anne. He is now infatuated with Catherine, a quirky tidbit that reveals the depth of his infatuation. He has begun to shower her with gifts, to dance with her at court, and to show her a kind of affection that has been missing from his life for years. He's no longer the sullen, angry man of just a few weeks ago. He is a man reborn, a man in love. And in his mind, Anne of Cleves is the only thing standing in the way of his new happiness. So, the hunt for the loophole, the desperate search for an excuse, now takes on a new urgency. It's no longer just about saving Cromwell's neck. It's about paving the way for a new queen. The Duke of Norfolk, Catherine Howard's uncle, is now a master of a different kind of game. He's a man who knows how to exploit the king's desires. He is not just working to bring Cromwell down. He's working to put his own niece on the throne. Historians still argue whether Cromwell's downfall was inevitable, or if it was a tragic consequence of his entanglement in the Anne of Cleves affair. Did his enemies, the Catholic faction at court, simply use this situation as an opportunity to strike, knowing that the king's fury would blind him to Cromwell's years of loyal service? Or did Cromwell, in his arrogance, overplay his hand and misjudge the king's volatile emotions? It's likely a mix of both. Cromwell was a man who made many enemies during his ruthless rise to power, and they were all waiting for an opportunity to strike. The Anne of Cleves affair was the perfect opportunity. The final act of the tragedy is now in motion. Cromwell, still convinced that he can win, is working furiously to secure the annulment. He is using all of his political skills, all of his cunning, to orchestrate the final phase of the plan. He is preparing for the trial that will dissolve the marriage, gathering evidence, lining up witnesses, and crafting a legal argument that he believes will satisfy the king. But as you watch him, a man so consumed with his own political survival that he is blind to the larger picture, you can see the end is already in sight. The king is already looking at Catherine Howard, already planning his next marriage, already moving on. And in his world, a man who has served his purpose is no longer needed. The king, who has so ruthlessly disposed of his wives, is now preparing to dispose of his most loyal servant. The Anne of Cleves affair is no longer just a royal embarrassment. It has now become the trigger for the fall of one of the most powerful men in English history. You are now a witness to one of the most cynical and absurd pieces of political theatre in all of history. The scene is the Convocation House at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. The month is July 1540. The air is heavy and hot, and the room is filled with some of the most powerful and learned men in England. Bishops, theologians, and lawyers, all assembled for a purpose that is both ridiculous and terrifying. Their purpose? To hold a trial to determine the validity of the king's marriage to Anne of Cleves. But this is not a trial in the traditional sense. It is a foregone conclusion, a charade designed to give a flimsy legal justification to a personal whim. The king has already made up his mind, and the men in this room, who are supposed to be impartial arbiters of the law, are nothing more than puppets, dancing to his tune. A mainstream historical fact of the matter is that the entire proceeding was a setup. The outcome was never in doubt. The only question was how to frame the arguments in a way that would be palatable to the English public, and more importantly to the king. The arguments presented are a masterclass in legal hair-splitting and theological gymnastics. The prosecution, led by the same men who had negotiated the marriage just a few months earlier, now argues that the marriage is invalid on three main grounds. First, the pre-contract with the Duke of Lorraine. They argue that despite the dissolution of the contract, it was not done properly, and therefore it still stands as a legal impediment to the marriage with Henry. This is a ridiculous argument, a flimsy pretext, and everyone in the room knows it. But they are nodding their heads, taking notes, pretending that this is a serious and legitimate legal argument. Second, they argue that the king's own consent was not freely given. They claim that he was forced into the marriage by his advisers, a ludicrous claim for a man who famously ruled with an iron fist and a fiery temper. They paint the king as a passive, helpless victim of his own ministers, a man who was deceived by a flattering portrait and a diplomatic scheme. This, of course, is a complete rewriting of history, a blatant lie. But again, The men in the room are nodding their heads, pretending to believe this absurd fiction. And third, they argue that the marriage was not in fact consummated. This is the most crucial part of the argument, the one legal point that actually holds some weight. The king's testimony is brought into evidence, his humiliating and brutally honest confession to his attendants that he left her as good a maid as I found her. They present this as proof that the marriage was never truly a marriage in the eyes of God or the law. The physical fact of the matter, or rather the lack of a physical fact, becomes the central pillar of their case. A quirky detail that is often overlooked is the sheer absurdity of the witness testimony. The men who are testifying are the very same men who were instrumental in arranging the marriage in the first place. They are now, under the threat of the king's displeasure, turning on their former colleagues and their former work, disavowing everything they had said and done just a few months earlier. It's a chilling reminder of how quickly loyalty can dissolve in the face of absolute power. One of them, a man named Richard Rich, a man famous for his willingness to betray anyone for personal gain, even testifies that Henry had told him, "I have not felt myself disposed to it," a quote that will forever haunt the historical record. Anne of Cleves herself is not present at the trial. She's a woman on trial for her own marriage, but she's not given a voice. She's simply a subject of the debate, a political object to be discussed and dissected. She is, in the eyes of the court, a problem to be solved, not a person to be heard. The entire proceeding is an open display of the king's power, a demonstration that he is above the law, above all law save his own desires. Historians still argue whether the entire proceeding was an act of genuine, albeit misguided legal and theological reasoning, or if it was a purely cynical political fabrication. Was the pre-contract argument a legitimate legal point that was being exploited for convenience, or was it a complete invention? The evidence seems to point to the latter. The trial was not a search for truth. It was a search for an excuse. It was a public performance, a grand piece of theatre designed to give Henry what he wanted, a clean break from a woman he could not stand, without alienating his Protestant allies, or admitting that he, the great King of England, had made a grave error in judgment. The entire thing is a testament to the king's ability to bend the world to his will, to make reality conform to his desires, no matter how petty or ridiculous. And at the end of it all, the result is never in doubt. You're a fly on the wall, a ghostly witness, as the news of the annulment trial reaches Anne of Cleves. She is staying at a small palace outside of London, having been told to await a message from the king. The message she receives, however, is not a message of love or of reconciliation. It is an embassy from the king's council, a group of sober-faced, nervous men who have come to tell her that her marriage is being declared null and void. The men lay out the details for her, in her halting English, the entire legal fiction of the pre-contract, the lack of consummation, and the king's claim that he was forced into the marriage. They are expecting a scene. They are expecting tears or anger, or protestations of her innocence. They are expecting the kind of fury that a woman who has been humiliated and rejected in public would unleash. But what they get, instead, is a quiet, thoughtful pause. Anne of Cleves, the woman everyone dismissed as a simpleton, as a passive pawn in a political game, surprises them. She is, for the first time in this entire affair, not bewildered. She's calm, composed, and utterly pragmatic. She's been told what the king wants, and she's smart enough to see the reality of her situation. She's a woman in a foreign land with no family to protect her. She is a woman whose husband, the most powerful man in the kingdom, has made it clear he wants nothing to do with her. And she's smart enough to realise that her only chance of survival is to cooperate. A mainstream historical fact of the matter is that Anne did not protest the annulment. She did not fight it. She simply accepted it. She signed the papers, she agreed to the terms, and she did so with a quiet dignity that stunned the men who were sent to her. She told them that she would do whatever the king wished, that she only wanted to please him. This was not a woman who was heartbroken or humiliated. This was a woman who was a survivor, a pragmatist, a player of a different kind of game than the men of the Tudor court were used to. Her response was a stroke of genius, an act of quiet, powerful cunning that saved her life. She gave the king what he wanted, a clean, uncontested break. In doing so, she gave him no reason to hate her. She made herself useful. She made herself a friend, a sister, a confidant, but not an enemy. A quirky little tidbit that shows just how well she read the room. She gave up her title as queen. and she accepted a new title, one that was designed to placate her, but that also gave her a new and unexpected power. She was given the title of the king's beloved sister. This was not just a title, it was a kind of protection, a kind of insurance policy. It meant that she was now a member of the king's family, a blood relation, and in the world of the Tudors, that meant she was safe. You can almost see the gears turning in her mind. She knew that if she fought the king, if she protested the annulment, she would be branded a traitor. She would be sent back to Germany in disgrace, a humiliated princess who had failed to secure her family's alliance. Or worse, she could face the fate of Anne Boleyn, a woman who had tried to fight the king and ended up losing her head. Anne of Cleves, in a stroke of brilliant, understated genius, realised that the best way to win was not to fight at all. The best way to survive was to give the king exactly what he wanted. Historians still argue whether Anne's acceptance of the annulment was a sign of her apathetic nature or a sign of her remarkable intelligence. Was she truly a woman who didn't care about her position, or was she a shrewd and cunning operator who saw the writing on the wall? The evidence points to the latter. She had a kind of quiet, understated wisdom that the men of the Tudor court, with their bluster and their swagger, completely underestimated. They saw a simpleton, a quiet German princess who was not a threat. They did not see a woman who was playing a long game, a game of survival. Her decision to cooperate was a shock to everyone. It was a shock to the men who had come to her expecting a fight. It was a shock to her family back in Germany, who were furious at her public humiliation. It was a shock to the court who had been expecting a grand public spectacle. But most of all, it was a shock to the king himself. He had been expecting a fight, and he had been prepared to win it. But instead, he was given a gift, a clean break, a quiet and dignified end to a humiliating affair. And in the end, it was Anne's quiet, unassuming wisdom that would save her life and give her a place in a world where so many women who had married Henry VIII had ended up losing their heads. The dust has settled, the trial is over, the annulment papers are signed, and the marriage that was never really a marriage is now officially null and void. But Anne of Cleves' story does not end here. In fact, it is about to take a turn that no one, not even the most cynical of courtiers, could have predicted. She has, through her quiet cooperation, earned something more valuable than a crown, a royal settlement. And you, a fly on the wall, are about to witness the moment when a woman who is a political liability becomes a financial asset. Henry, for his part, is not a man who does things halfway. Having gotten what he wanted, a clean break from a woman he found repulsive, he is now in a magnanimous mood. A mainstream historical fact is that he was so pleased with Anne's quiet, dignified cooperation that he decided to be incredibly generous. He saw her not as a spurned wife, but as a loyal and sensible sister. He decided to reward her handsomely for her good sense, and what a reward it was. The terms of the settlement were, by any standard, extraordinary. He gave her a generous income, an annual allowance of £4,000, which was an enormous amount of money in the 16th century. To put it in perspective, this was a larger income than many of the most powerful nobles in the kingdom, but that was just the beginning. He also gave her a whole host of properties, some of the most beautiful and well-appointed in England. She was given Richmond Palace, a magnificent royal residence on the Thames that had once been a favourite of his father, Henry VII. She was given Bletchingley Manor in Surrey, Hever Castle in Kent, which had, ironically, once belonged to the Boleyn family, and a number of other estates across the country. These were not just country houses, they were magnificent properties, and they came with all the staff and servants necessary to run them. A quirky detail that reveals the true extent of his generosity is that he even gave her a pension for her servants. He knew that the people who had come with her from Germany had been a source of gossip and mockery at court. He knew that they would need to be taken care of. So he gave them a pension for life, a testament to his own strange sense of paternalism and his desire to do things in a grand and public manner. He was, in a way, showing the world that he was not a monster, that he was a fair and generous king, as long as you did what he told you to do. Now here's where the open scholarly debate begins. Historians still argue whether Henry's generosity was a sign of genuine affection for Anne, or if it was a calculated political move. Was he truly touched by her quiet grace and her dignified acceptance of her fate, or was he trying to buy her silence? Was he trying to send a message to the rest of Europe that he was a fair and reasonable king, and that the fault for the marriage lay not with him, but with the woman herself? The truth, as is often the case, is probably a combination of the two. Henry was a man whose personal feelings and political calculations were often intertwined. He was genuinely pleased with her, and he saw a clear advantage in keeping her in England and in his good graces. By giving her a generous settlement and allowing her to live in England, he was doing two things. First, he was ensuring that she would not return to her family in Germany, where she could become a pawn in a new political game, a symbol of English betrayal. Second, he was setting a precedent, a kind of unspoken rule for his future wives. Cooperate, and you will be rewarded. Fight, and you will be punished. So, Anne of Cleves, the woman who had been brought to England to be a queen, was now a wealthy, independent woman, one of the richest in the country. She was given a life of comfort and luxury, a kind of retirement package that was more generous than anything she could have hoped for back in Germany. She was not a queen. She was not a wife. She was something else entirely, a survivor. And in the world of the Tudors, that was a fate far more desirable than any crown. You watch her as she settles into her new life, a woman who, through a quiet and dignified act of surrender, has managed to outmaneuver the most powerful man in the kingdom. The mainstream historical fact of the matter is that this was a completely novel arrangement. There was no precedent for it. No former Queen of England had ever been given such a title, or such a prominent place in the royal family. Anne of Cleves was, in essence, a pioneer. Her new title was more than just a name. It was a kind of political and social insurance policy. It meant that she was no longer an outsider. She was no longer just a German princess who had failed to become queen. She was now a member of the king's family, a blood relation, and in the world of the Tudors that meant she was safe. It meant that she was now a part of the inner circle, a person who could command respect and even affection. And you can see the change in her. The quiet, bewildered princess who arrived at Rochester is now a woman who is beginning to find her footing. She is learning English with a passion. She's learning to play cards, to ride, and to hunt. She's embracing the English way of life with a kind of quiet and determined grace. She's no longer just a visitor. She is, in a very real way, at home. The king, for his part, is now on his best behaviour. He is genuinely pleased with her. A quirky and telling tidbit is that he refers to her with a kind of gentle, paternal affection. He visits her at her various residences, and he exchanges gifts with her. They have a kind of strange, comfortable relationship, one that is not based on love or desire, but on a kind of mutual respect and a shared history of embarrassment. He sees her as a good and kind woman who is simply not the right fit for him, and he feels a kind of strange, paternal protectiveness toward her. He wants her to be happy. He wants her to be comfortable. He wants the world to see that he is a fair and generous king, and she is the living, breathing proof of his magnanimity. The court, of course, has to follow his lead. The same courtiers who once mocked her German dresses and her lack of English now bow to her with a new kind of respect. They invite her to their homes, and they send her gifts. She's now an honoured guest, a member of the royal family, a woman who is not a threat to anyone. She is a woman who, in a world of high-stakes drama and political intrigue, has managed to find her own quiet and very safe place. This is where the open scholarly debate begins. Historians still argue whether Anne of Cleves was truly a victim of circumstance, or if she was a shrewd and cunning woman who, from the very beginning, saw a better life for herself outside of marriage to a volatile king. Was her quiet cooperation a sign of her apathetic nature, or was it a calculated risk that paid off handsomely? The evidence points to the latter. She was a woman who was smart enough to know that you could not fight the king and win. She was a woman who was smart enough to know that sometimes the best way to survive a storm is to lie low and wait for it to pass. And the storm is about to pass. Henry, now infatuated with his new bride, Catherine Howard, is a happy man. The court is bustling with new energy, new life, new ambition. The Anne of Cleves affair is now, for the most part, a thing of the past. It is a quiet footnote in the history of a turbulent reign. But for Anne herself, it is the beginning of a new and unexpected life, a life of comfort, luxury, and most importantly, safety. She's not a queen, but she's something better. She's a survivor. She's a beloved sister. And in the world of the Tudors, that was the greatest title of all. You watch her as she learns to ride, as she plays cards with her ladies-in-waiting, as she laughs and smiles. She's a woman who has, against all odds, found her own happy ending. You're a phantom presence, a silent observer of a life that defies all historical norms. Anne of Cleves, the woman who was briefly a queen and is now the king's beloved sister, is living a life that is utterly and completely unique. She's not a wife, not a queen, but she is, in a very real way, one of the most powerful and influential women in England. Her position is so strange, so unprecedented, that it is a historical curiosity in its own right. She is living a life of comfort and luxury, a life that is, by all accounts, far more peaceful and secure than the lives of the women who came before and after her. She's not constantly looking over her shoulder. She's not worried about being sent to the scaffold. She's simply living her life. A mainstream historical fact of her life is that she was incredibly popular with the English people. They saw her as a good and kind woman who had been wronged by the king, and they admired her quiet dignity and her grace. She was a living, breathing symbol of the king's generosity and a testament to her own remarkable character. She spends her days at her various estates, entertaining guests, managing her vast household, and enjoying the simple pleasures of her new life. A quirky tidbit that reveals her personality is that she became something of a connoisseur of English food and drink. She loved English beer, and she developed a taste for English pastries and sweetmeats. She was, in essence, a woman who embraced her new home, and she did so with a kind of quiet and determined grace. She becomes a kind of social hub, a centre of quiet conviviality. Her palaces are always filled with guests, with music, and with laughter. She has a large retinue of her own, a mix of English and German servants, and she's a kind and generous mistress. She is, in a way, creating her own little world, a world that is safe and warm and filled with a kind of quiet happiness that was so rare in the turbulent world of the Tudor court. She's also, in a very real way, an important figure in the court. She's an advisor, a confidant, a kind of elder stateswoman. She's a woman who, having no personal agenda, can be trusted. Henry VIII, a man who famously distrusted everyone, trusted her. He would often seek her counsel, and he would often confide in her. She was a woman who could listen without judgment, a woman who could offer advice without fear of reprisal. She was, in a way, the sister he never had, the kind of family he had always longed for. This is where the open scholarly debate begins. Historians still argue whether Anne of Cleves' success was a result of her own quiet intelligence, or a result of Henry's personal need for a kind of moral compass. She was a woman who was kind and good, but she was also a woman who was smart enough to know that in the world of the Tudors, kindness and goodness were not enough. You had to have a plan, you had to have a strategy, and her strategy, which was to be a friend, not a foe, was the most brilliant of all. She's a living testament to the fact that in the world of the Tudors, being a queen was not always the best thing. Being a queen meant that you were constantly in danger. You were constantly under scrutiny. You were constantly at risk of being deposed, or worse, executed. But being a beloved sister, a friend, a confidant, meant that you were safe, you were secure, you were in a way untouchable. You watch her as she lives out her days, a woman who, having been a pawn in a political game, has managed to turn the tables and become a player in her own right. She's not the most famous of Henry's wives, she's not the most beautiful, she's not the most accomplished, but she is, without a doubt, the most successful. She's a woman who, in a world of turmoil and bloodshed, has managed to find her own quiet and very safe place. And in the history of the Tudors, that is a feat that is more impressive than any crown. The years drift by, and you, a timeless observer, are now watching the long, slow, and remarkably peaceful life of Anne of Cleves unfold. While the world around her churns with the constant drama and bloodshed of the Tudor court, she remains a steadfast island of calm. She is living proof that in the game of survival, the quietest player often wins. Her life is a stark contrast to the turbulent fate of the women who came after her. Henry, after his marriage to Catherine Howard, the vivacious and flirtatious niece of the Duke of Norfolk, finds a brief moment of happiness, but you know how this story ends. A mainstream historical fact is that Catherine's past and her youthful indiscretions came to light, and she too was sent to the block. She was a woman who lived fast and died young, a tragic and brief reign that was as brutal as it was predictable. Anne, you can see, watches this from a safe distance, a quiet, mournful spectator to a kind of historical echo. After Catherine Howard's execution, Henry marries his sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr. She's a twice-widowed, mature, and pious woman who in many ways is the exact opposite of the young and foolish Catherine Howard. Catherine Parr is not a great beauty, but she is a great diplomat. She's a kind and gentle stepmother to Henry's children, and she brings a kind of domestic harmony to the court that has been absent for years. Anne, you see, forges a kind of quiet and respectful friendship with her. They are two women who have, in their own ways, managed to navigate the turbulent waters of Henry's affections, and they have a kind of unspoken understanding. A quirky detail that reveals the depth of Anne's integration into English life is that she becomes a close friend of the Princess Mary, the Catholic daughter of Henry and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. This friendship, a kind of odd couple pairing between a quiet Protestant princess and a devout Catholic one, is a testament to Anne's unique position. She's a woman who, having no personal agenda, can be friends with everyone. She's a kind of neutral zone, a safe space in a court where religious and political divisions are always simmering beneath the surface. You can see them together, two women who have both, in their own ways, been wronged by the king, finding a kind of solace in each other's company. Anne's life is now a rhythm of comfortable routine. She spends her days at her various estates, managing her vast household and enjoying the simple pleasures of her new life. She's known for her lavish entertainments, her generosity to her staff, and her kind and gentle nature. She is, in a very real way, a woman who is at peace. She has escaped the constant pressure of being a queen, the relentless scrutiny, the terrible fear. She's a woman who has found her own way, her own path, and she has done so with a kind of quiet dignity that is utterly remarkable. This is where the open scholarly debate begins. Historians still argue whether Anne of Cleves was a happy woman. Was she truly content with her life as the king's beloved sister, or was she a woman who, despite her wealth and her security, still harboured a kind of quiet sorrow? The evidence points to her contentment. She was a woman who was practical, a pragmatist who understood that in the world she lived in, happiness was not a given. It was something you had to fight for. And she, in her own quiet way, had fought for it. She had chosen security over status, and in doing so she had secured a long and happy life. You watch as she outlives Henry VIII. You watch as she outlives her new friend, the young King Edward VI. You watch as she witnesses the rise of Queen Mary, and then the rise of Queen Elizabeth I. She's a kind of living anachronism, a woman who has survived a generation of turmoil, a quiet spectator to the great sweep of history. She is the last of Henry's wives to die a natural death. She's the last of his queens to be buried with full royal honours. She's a woman who, in a world of high-stakes drama and political intrigue, has managed to live a long and remarkably peaceful life. And in the history of the Tudors, that is a feat that is more impressive than any crown. The years continue their relentless march, and you, a silent observer, are now witnessing a truly unique historical phenomenon. Anne of Cleves, the king's divorced wife and beloved sister, navigating the reigns of not one, but three of Henry VIII's children. Her quiet, dignified presence is a constant thread through the tumultuous tapestry of English history, a testament to her remarkable ability to adapt and survive. After the death of Henry VIII in 1547, the country is plunged into a new kind of turmoil. The young pious King Edward VI, a boy of 9, takes the throne. He is a staunch Protestant, and his reign sees a rapid and often brutal shift in religious policy. The English court, which had already seen so much change, now undergoes a complete transformation. But through it all, Anne of Cleves remains a kind of constant. She's still the king's beloved sister, a respected and honoured member of the royal family. She continues to live her life of quiet comfort, a beloved figure in a court that is otherwise consumed with political and religious strife. A mainstream historical fact that underscores her unique position is that she was a welcomed guest at the coronation of both Edward VI and later Queen Mary I. She was treated with all the honour and respect due to a member of the royal family. She rode in the procession, she was given a place of honour at the feast, and she was, in every way, a living symbol of a more peaceful, if also more complex, past. Her presence at these events was a quiet but powerful statement. She was a survivor, a woman who had navigated the treacherous waters of the Tudor court and had come out not just alive, but with her dignity and her fortune intact. Her relationship with the new monarchs is a study in quiet diplomacy. With Edward VI, she is a kind and gentle aunt figure, She visits him at court, she sends him gifts, and she offers him a kind of quiet counsel that is free from any political agenda. She is, in a way, a living link to his father's memory, a kind of peaceful ghost from a past that was anything but. Her relationship with Mary the Rye is even more remarkable. Mary, a devout Catholic, and Anne, a quiet Protestant, are in many ways natural enemies. But you see, they have a kind of unspoken bond. They are both women who were, in their own ways, wronged by Henry VIII. Mary was cast aside for Anne Boleyn, and Anne was cast aside for Catherine Howard. They both know what it is like to be a pawn in a political game, to be a woman whose life is dictated by the whims of a man. A quirky detail that shows the depth of their relationship is that Anne even tries to intercede on behalf of her old friend, the Princess Elizabeth, during Mary's reign. She tries to convince Mary to be more lenient with her sister, a testament to her kindness and her unique position as a kind of moral compass in a world that had so often lost its way. And then comes the final act of the drama, the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. By the time Elizabeth takes the throne, Anne is an old woman, a kind of living legend. She's the last surviving wife of Henry VIII, a living link to a past that is now becoming a kind of distant, almost mythical memory. She is, in a way, the queen who wasn't, a quiet testament to a road not taken. Elizabeth, a shrewd and pragmatic monarch, respects Anne. She understands her unique position, and she honours it. She treats her with all the honour and respect that is due to a member of the royal family, a quiet acknowledgement of the fact that Anne of Cleves was a woman who, in her own quiet way, had played the game of survival and had won. This is where the open scholarly debate begins. Historians still argue whether Anne's longevity was a result of her own political cunning, or if it was simply a matter of her apathetic nature. Was she a woman who was too simple to be a threat, and therefore too simple to be a target? Or was she a woman who was so intelligent, so cunning, that she knew the best way to survive was to simply be a friend to everyone, a foe to no one? The evidence points to the latter. She was a woman who understood the game, but she was smart enough to know that the best way to win was not to play at all. She was a woman who, in a world of turmoil and bloodshed, had managed to live a long and remarkably peaceful life. And in the history of the Tudors, that is a feat that is more impressive than any crown. You watch her as she lives out her final years, a quiet, gentle presence in a world that is so often loud and violent. She's a woman who, having been brought to England to be a queen, had managed to find a better life for herself, a life of comfort, of luxury, and most importantly, of safety. She's a living testament to the fact that in the game of survival, sometimes the best move is not to fight at all. You're now a witness to the final chapter of Anne of Cleves' remarkable life. The year is 1557, and she's an old woman now, her face etched with the lines of a long and eventful life. The world has changed. The king she was briefly married to, the man who was so famously repulsed by her, has been dead for a decade. The children he left behind have ruled and passed, and a new queen, Elizabeth I, now sits on the throne. Through it all, Anne of Cleves has remained a constant, a quiet, dignified presence in a world that is so often loud and violent. She dies peacefully, in her own bed, at Chelsea Manor. It's a death that is, in itself, a kind of miracle in a world where so many royal figures met their end on the scaffold or in the prison cell. She has outlived them all. Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Catherine Howard, Thomas Cromwell, and even her good friend, Mary Quine. She's a woman who, through a stroke of historical luck and a complete lack of political ambition, has managed to survive the most dangerous court in Europe. A mainstream historical fact of her final moments is that she was cared for with the utmost respect. She was given a state funeral, one that was fitting for a Queen of England, even though she was never officially crowned. Her body was carried through the streets of London in a magnificent procession, and she was buried in Westminster Abbey, in a tomb that was designed to befit a royal personage. She was not a queen, but she was buried like one. This was a final, powerful testament to her unique place in English history. Her legacy, however, is not one of power or ambition. It is a legacy of survival, of quiet dignity, and of a kind of pragmatic wisdom that was so rare in her time. She was a woman who was a pawn in a political game, but she was smart enough to know that the best way to win was not to fight at all. She was a woman who was offered a crown, but she chose instead to live a long and happy life. A quirky detail that is often overlooked in the grand sweep of history is the fact that Anne of Cleves' legacy is, in many ways, an unwritten one. She left no great pronouncements, no great acts of power. She was not a warrior queen like Elizabeth I, or a devout monarch like Mary I. She was simply a woman who lived her life with a quiet grace, a woman who was a friend to everyone and a foe to no one. Her legacy is not in the books of history, but in the quiet memories of the people who knew her, and in the kind of subtle, unseen influence that she had on the people around her. This is where the open scholarly debate begins. Historians still argue whether Anne of Cleves was a victim of circumstances or a master of her own destiny. Was she a woman who, through her lack of ambition, found a kind of freedom that was denied to all the women around her? Or was she a cunning and brilliant woman who, from the very beginning, knew that the best way to survive was to live a life of quiet, unassuming retirement? The evidence points to the latter. She was a woman who knew what she was doing. She was a woman who, in a world of turmoil and bloodshed, had managed to find her own quiet and very safe place. She was a woman who, through a series of wise and pragmatic choices, had managed to live a life that was, in many ways, more successful than the lives of the queens who came before and after her. You're now at the end of the story. You have witnessed the life of a woman who, having been a pawn in a political game, had managed to turn the tables and become a player in her own right. You have seen her arrive as a bewildered princess, and you have seen her die as a beloved and respected member of the English royal family. Her story is not one of a great love affair, or of a great political triumph. It is a story of a woman who, in a world of great men, had managed to find her own way. Her story is not one of a queen. It is a story of a survivor, and in the annals of history there is no greater legacy than that. And as the last candle flickers and dies, casting long shadows across the room, I want you to take a moment to reflect on the quiet strength of a woman who, in her own way, was more powerful than any king. She was a woman who, in a world of great men, had managed to find her own way, to live a life of peace and comfort, and to die in her own bed, a feat that was more impressive than any crown. So before you close your eyes, take a moment to appreciate the quiet power of a woman who, in a world of high-stakes drama and political intrigue, had managed to win the game of survival without ever even drawing a sword. Her story is a testament to the fact that in the annals of history, sometimes, the greatest heroes are not the ones who fight the hardest, but the ones who live the longest.